everyone, welcome back to my channel and you're watching The Brown Feather. And in today's video, once again, I want to mention about the launch of my new merch for clinical researchers, research nurses, and all people in STEM who are otherwise not included in major merchandising brands. So I will be representing all of your professions and giving you some solid material to enjoy some work pride day to day. I have stickers and pins coming out. Don't forget to visit my channel on stemstickers.com, names right there. You can also visit us on Instagram at STEMstickers by the Brown Feminist Canada. Now, without further ado, let's jump into part 2 of this video, our crash course on grant writing, research grant writing. Now, the examples I've been giving in this entire granting series and crash course are going to have examples from both biomedical sciences and clinical research, just because I know that the major idea of writing grants is similar for any of these fields as long as you're in like health sci, and I think they can be applicable for both. For wherever they differ, I'm going to kind of bring in examples from both how it would look like if you worked in a wet lab environment versus how it might look like if you work in the clinical research world. Now, in order to jump into it, remember that in part 1, we did a full overview of what grants are, who granting sponsor agencies are, what the types of grants are that might be right or wrong for you, and of course, the checklist that you should be first going through before even deciding if writing a grant is going to be right for you in that moment with that particular grant and your role in particular. In this part 2, I'm going to be jumping into grant writing. Now, the very first thing, which kind of ties into the last part of the first video, was deciding on your team and the full CV. Now, this doesn't mean that once you've started writing a grant, you can't add any more members. You might think like, oh, we're gonna need a person for that. Oh, we need to outsource that. Oh, we need a collaborator like that. That's obviously gonna happen. But your core team of PIs and co-PIs, it's good to have a solid discussion with them beforehand and make sure you have everyone's full academic CVs and their full designations, certificates, all of that. A set of that in hand is gonna help filling out the rest of the grant so much easier. When writing a grant, please be super organized. The more organized you are from earlier on, the better it is going to be and the easier it is going to be for you to complete it in a clean way. Now, what that means is have your folders, have your subfolders, have something on the cloud or your SharePoint, wherever you think it is best to do so. And in order to have any drafts shared with anyone, always do a proper full file name ending with the version date and whoever's made the last edit, their initials. So for example, if I was writing a grant on maybe, I don't know, let's say COVID-19 grant on patient follow-up, underscore, the date is 1st January 2025, underscore FA. So you know what was the last date that this was edited and by who. This way you can do lots of back and forth with people and still be able to track what the latest version was. If you need to go back to a version, you'll have that. This is just generally very good for any kind of research role, not just grant writing, but particularly in grant writing, where you're going to have so much back and forth with your collaborators. Now, the first draft, it's best to keep it to yourself, within your team, and get some internal feedback and then start sharing it with outer circle of PIs and your collaborators, and then to another outer circle of mentors. And then usually a lot of institute will have an internal grant support committee who will give you review in order to make some improvements and changes, and then recommend that it can be submitted externally. Because when you're submitting a grant externally, you are representing the whole organization. So you do want to make sure the grant is up to quality and has the best chances of being funded. A grant passing means a grant funded. It will be a big prestige for the institution as well as yourself, your collaborators, and your team if it does get funded. So that is obviously the goal. But this is usually the process that we take in order to start grant writing. So let's jump into the typical steps we like to follow. First of all, you have your folders in place and you have everybody's academic CVs, usually signed and dated and updated, and their qualifications, their degrees, their licensures, what they have clinical capacity to do, and stuff like that. Number two, you want to make sure you have all of the materials of, the kind of things you're bringing into the team. This person can offer their clinical, time and expertise. This person has the special equipment. This person has lab space. That person has a team. All of that stuff can be in one place. Now you jump into what the grant is about. You want to start off with a little overview. What are you trying to study? Usually most grants have an abstract section. I personally like to write the abstract in the end because I want to see what becomes the most prominent part of that grant in relation to the granting objectives. As you're writing the grant, I always like to keep repeatedly going back to the grant outline that was provided, because a lot of the times you will see, I was thinking of it in this way, but you know what? The grant's goals are more like to figure out this part of the disease. So maybe we can tweak it a little so it aligns better what the granting agency wants. So I like to go back to it every day or every few days to make sure, my grant and my research and my science is well aligned with the goals of the grant and things they want covered in it. Sometimes I might not want to cover more demographic markers, how it's affecting people of different sex at birth, or people of different genders and dates of birth and things like that, and age and other height requirements and things like that. But maybe, having a very diverse population included in your grant is in your submission is an important thing to the granting committee. So you see that these are easy things for you to include. It's just like one extra little form in your patient intake, structure, intake survey. So this is something you can easily go back and include, and you can show how your research project is actually inclusive of these population demographic markers. So similarly, keep going back and forth as you're writing it. Now, when you have a little paragraph of overview, I won't call it the abstract because I like to write the abstract at the end. It's really good to start with a strong literature review. Not only is it going to be something that's necessary by the granting committee to see what is the knowledge that's been there in the fields, but it's actually going to be super helpful for you because you're getting a little brush up on what the latest papers are. You can have your associate do it, you can do it, somebody in your team can do it. Maybe you are the coordinator or the associate supporting the PI. This is an excellent way to get your own knowledge up to date. And it's an excellent way to get to writing and get that flow of like what has been happening in this field and this subfield, what makes it so important to fight this disease model, this healthcare issue, this health system issue, whatever it is, at this level, and why, what are the main barriers? Why have we not found a solution to this before? What has failed? What can I do differently? So having a good literature review is very important. Now, of course, by this time, if you're writing a grant, you should know that there has to be a solid kind of tool for citation management. Writing and downloading all of your papers, labeling them well, putting them in a specific folder for your library. And then as you're reading through them, I personally like to use EndNote. Some people use Mendeley, but there are other software citation tools to use. So you would die if you were like manually trying to do a citation on a thesis or a grant. There's just so much to do. And it's just a big waste of time. So please use a solid kind of, tool to have yourself organized when it comes to these citations. Now, as you've done your literature review, then you're kind of trying to narrow in, this is all that's happened. Let's use a disease model, for example. Let's say the stomach, okay? Because I really like the stomach. I work in gastro. So let's just say we're going to talk about gastric cancers, and we're going to talk about gastric cancers in the context of certain dietary issues or like certain subcultural food intake and things like that, or genetics. We're trying to find something that's going to identify gastric cancers a little bit sooner, something like that. So in that basically general world, you're going to say what the rates are currently in your country, in the world, in the population that you're trying to study, what mortality rates are, why nothing has really been solved currently, what has been done, and where the shortages are. Maybe we have some cures, but not a very high percentage of people are surviving the 5-year mark. What are the common surgeries available? What are the common treatments available? So you're kind of giving a summary to that. If you're working in more basic sciences, you would be talking about maybe the cell cells that typically line the stomach, and how they have been able to show, I don't know, certain PPIs helping, or certain common drugs coming and interacting with those stomach walls and causing the cancer, or slowing down the cancer, or whatever. So you're talking about the cell lines and everything that we've already studied in that field, and what we know and what we don't know, and maybe the kind of therapy we want to deliver, because the stomach has such an acidic environment or whatever. We would now need to have this new advanced tool in order to assess it earlier, stop it earlier with these kind of drugs. And so that's kind of the goal. That's something what you're trying to test, so on. So you basically start with a broader summary and literature view of the whole field, and you're bringing it down closer and closer to why your research is so relevant, and your research is going to be so important to solve this thing that is important to you and important to the grant. As you're going forward into the grant, you're starting to bring in your expertise, how many years you've worked on it, cite some of your own recent publications, some of your collaborators' publications, to show not only is it going to be important to solve as a general rule for society, but you guys are the exact people who should be doing this project, because you have all these years of experience and skills and specialty that go into studying this, and it's brought you this far, and now you want to do this project which can really put everything together. So that's the tone that you want to have in your grant. So you've done your lit review, you've done your kind of hypothesis, you want to really clarify with a statistician at this point, if what kind of study it should be, if it's going to be like an objective related, a hypothesis related to prove or disprove something, what kind of numbers you're looking at. So that kind of takes us into more of the method section. So you have your hypothesis and your objectives and your aims laid out, and you obviously have to know how realistic they are with your resources, and then you're talking about methods. Now, methods can look obviously drastically different if you're in basic science versus in clinical research. In basic science, it would be, access to those cell lines, animal models, laboratory spaces, technicians, grad students, whatever you need to pull that off, and past studies to show, those methods have worked to a certain degree. And then, of course, in clinical research, your capacity to identify those patients, recruit those patients, number of sites, number of collaborators, things like that, and what kind of samples, would patients be even willing to do them? Would there be compensation for patients' time or patients, voluntary work, things like that, and how many patients you would need. So that brings us to sample size, which is needed for both basic science and clinical research. So at this point, a lot of PIs like to talk to a statistician on the team, a biostats person who can help you, come up with a solid sample size. You might be able to do it yourself. Essentially, 300, 500, 1,000 patients, or 50 mice, 100 mice if they're genetically identical. Or in the human population, of course, there's a lot more genetic variability. So how many samples would you need, and how solid would that p-value or whatever value basically make your answer? Are you to disprove or prove your hypothesis? So things like that will go in there. It's very mathematical. I myself am not an expert in this. You might be, but always have this part checked and double checked. Get a consultant with an analyst and a statistician and a PI to make sure those numbers are solid. So much is going to rest on these numbers. Then, of course, you're moving on to what kind of statistical tests you will run, what kind of laboratory materials you will need, reagents you're going to need, timing you're going to need, what kind of sample population you're going to need, and the resources available. So as you're doing your materials and methods, you're already kind of shaping up your budget in your mind, because you know what's going to be needed. Typically, for a clinical research study, you know that your clinic on average maybe sees 500 patients with gastric issues. Out of them, maybe, 30 a year develop some kind of early gastric cancers. So if you're seeing that, then obviously you cannot get all 3,000 patients at your site. So you obviously have to say, we're going to partner with 10 sites in Canada, 15 in the US. We already have this strong network of collaborators, many of which have signed on to this project. And so it's going to be very easy if we're even targeting 20 or 10 of those 30 patients a year to consent to our study per site, and then we have other similar sites throughout this province and within this country. Then with this kind of budget, we should be able to achieve this kind of recruitment numbers in this number of years. So as you're actually doing these methods section, you're slowly filling in your budget tab, typically in a nice Excel sheet format, as well as your timeline. Obviously, grants will want something at remarkable timeline, but just to win the grant, do not overcommit to a point that you know it's not going to happen. Real world research will always have, misses, will have delays. People are going to get, quit your team. Patients are going to drop out of the study. There's going to be a worldwide pandemic causing shutdowns or whatever it is. There will always be something. You might take a leave of absence for health reasons. Anything can happen, of course, but you have to take a reasonable approach. Not the best case scenario, not the worst case scenario, something reasonable. If you're really expecting to recruit 300 patients a year, maybe write 200 just to be on the safe side, so you're still kind of up to date. But if you need 1,000 patients, that's still a 5-year project. So many grants may or may not want to do that kind of long-term commitment. Some grants may require a goal to be met at each end of this year. So you might have to do some kind of a report, an update of some sort. You're presenting at a conference and you're showing what new stuff you've achieved in that 1 year in order for the money for the next year to be released. So you're doing all of that stuff. You're talking about materials, equipment, statistical analysis. You're filling in your budget timeline. You also now have to bring in the issue of REB, which hospital is going to be the lead site, where the research ethics board is. So at this time, of course, instead of being like an individual person, if you are part and affiliated with, you're a senior scientist or an associate working with 2 PIs and backed up by a hospital, a research institute, a university, they will have their established research ethics boards. So you're mentioning like, this is the lead side. We're going to have our research ethics board review it, or we have this special like CTO, like we have in Ontario, Canada. They're going to approve it for the whole province. And then the individual sites will just kind of customize the informed consent forms. Or if you're in a lab, they have their own kind of REB. If you're doing animal testing, it might need its own research ethics approvals. If you're doing human subject work, it needs its own research ethics approvals. So you're mentioning these are the people you're going to apply to, and you expect to get it approved. And then you're going into, data security. Where is your data going to be stored and things like that? And then you have expertise in handling this scale of projects. You're going to have a project manager for a very large scale project. Then you want to talk a little bit about the role and responsibility of each person, what the skills you're bringing to the team. So remember how we had that big CV collection and qualifications collection. So you're just going to tabulate those in. I'm a PI with 15 years of experience, or I'm an associate working with these 2 PIs. We have our PhDs and we have our papers published on this topic, and we're collaborating with that clinician who's bringing that in. We're collaborating with that PI to bring that in, that scientist to bring that in. These are the people who are going to be reviewing all of the data and its original contents. We have, a recognized statistician who has this many years of experience, who will be doing this work. We have somebody who will be doing data visualization, analysis, manuscript writing. We have 3 research assistants who will be supporting the team through all of these tasks. We have coordinators and stuff like that. We have the support of our department heads to do this kind of large scale project, understanding departmental impact. So you want that paragraph or 2 kind of explaining the role of each person. So usually at this point we're using initials, so you would be like FA will be in charge. Usually grants will have lots of forms for you to fill out and a nice structure. So what I'm saying is not just going to be on a random Excel sheet or Word document. It's good to have some kind of a draft, but then you usually have to go online and put in pieces with word limits into each section. So once you have your initial draft, go back and check what they want, what format they want it in, what kind of language they want. They might want a lay version of it, which means somebody who is like a lay person, non-scientific person, can be able to understand the importance of the grant. They usually might have to write a lay version of the abstract as well. We want to solve this disease because it can kill up to this many people in the world, and it causes, after catching the disease, it's usually too late. So by creating this tool, if it works in the full population, we can bring it to the bedside, and that would mean that we can catch cancers much earlier on. So this kind of language is going to be what a lay audience will want, and that might be because the granting commission, the granting committee themselves might have, people from basic sciences, people who are clinicians, people who are ethicists, and different kinds of people in that sponsoring agency who will review it. So having that is really helpful. Of course, then you need to have certain letters showing, approval from your institution, whether or not your research institution is approved to do this kind of research. You have an ethics board in place. Your department head approves of you submitting this. Your PIs and co-PIs all have a signature page, and major team members kind of sign it off. stuff like that. They all log on, they sign on, they submit their CVs, and then, it might go for internal review. So at this point, you are sharing your initial drafts with the team, you're getting feedback, you're changing it, you're having multiple meetings, you're also having to maintain the deadline of, applying to this grant. So all of this, it's always best to start early on, a few months ahead in time at least. It takes a long time to put it in place, but it takes an equally long time to do back and forth. And somebody will be like, oh, I think we should be doing this, that makes more sense. Then somebody else is going to be like, no, that's not going to make as much sense, that's not going to make the granting agency happy. And the other person's going to be like, we shouldn't be doing animal testing to begin with, we should be doing it in that model instead. There's going to be difference in opinions, but a big part of growing as a scientist is to learn how to navigate these, learn how to have those discussions. And of course, like the lead PI will have a little bit more say, but having those collaborative discussions and then keeping some, removing others, otherwise you can't move forward if you're in a deadlock. After all of that, you usually do an internal institutional review for larger grants. For small project grants, $10,000, $30,000, $50,000, not really. If you're looking at like $500,000 or more, I've typically seen, or even like a $300,000 grant, most institutions set up like an internal review committee that you submit to a few weeks ahead. Those people review it, give you some solid input, you can make some corrections, and then submit the final one. Then of course that might be it, or that might be one of those grants where they have multiple levels of review. Maybe they got 1,000 submissions, they'll cut it down to like, I don't know, 50, and then out of those 50, maybe only 30 will get the grant. Or they have a limited amount of money, maybe $10 million this year for all the research in this field, and out of them, it's going to be coming in a rotating fashion. The best ones will get funded, and then they'll see if they have, depending on how much you're asking for, they'll see if they have anything left over to, fund the slightly less novel but maybe meaningful research. When you're talking about budgets, of course, you don't want to underestimate it and then be stuck with a deficit that you have to come up with the money for, but you also don't want to inflate it too much. The granting commission feels like you're just going to be wasting that money. If you have to hire a research technician and typical salary ranges go from $60,000 to $100,000, it's fair to say, you can quote them for a 90 and say, I don't need the best technician in the market, but yeah, my technician gets paid somewhere between $80,000 to $90,000. But if you're charging them $150,000 for something that the market rate is clearly $100,000 a year, then, that's going to be, they're going to look at it like it's an inflated grant, and you may or may not, that may be a negative thing for you. Similarly, just like with testing and stuff, you can get a few quotations in, and if, certain blood tests you have to run, certain pathology tests you have to run, certain surgical procedures you have to run for this, maybe if you can show that, okay, typically per person it's $5,000 per patient that it's going to take, you can charge them $6,000 in case there is any overhead costs, any institutional overhead. But if you're charging them like $15,000, $20,000 per patient for that procedure, sooner or later in the community, they're gonna know. A lot of the times, granting budgets, once they release the money, they will need to see receipts of how everything was spent. So usually your institution has like a finance person who helps you with that. But in the end, there might be a lot of money not used, and it might have to go back. And then they're not always super happy about money going back because they had a mandate to spend that $1 million in doing research. And now you've overbilled them so much and not been able to utilize it. So it's just money that couldn't be used in this fiscal year and will likely go back to the government central pot without having, it could have maybe been left over to fund another project. And because of your overestimation, it didn't. So there's a lot going on with grants. I wanted to do this video to give you guys a general idea of how grant writing works. There's of course so much nuance in different fields and specialties, so many questions. I welcome all of them. Please feel free to comment down below and tell me all your different nitty-gritty questions about grant writing. Of course, like I said, being organized is the most important advice I can give you guys. Folders, EndNote, or any kind of citation tool, proper file naming thing, format. Keep going back and reviewing the grant over and over again, and come back and review your objectives. Put in more details than less, and then find ways with the language to simplify and to make it more precise. Usually when you write something for a first draft, you use way too many words and language to express yourself. That can be a lot more succinct and precise. But I think I've been able to cover majority of the things I wanted to cover today. And then you go into submission, you go into review your grant. You may have questions coming back to you. Be prepared for that. But while you're waiting for this grant, that's it. Move on. Pretend it's not there. Move on to your next grant writing project. Move on to your next manuscript. Move on to your next whatever. One more thing I want to mention that grants want to see is, in order for you to fulfill the promise of doing this research, it's not just doing it. They want to see your plans of publishing, attending conferences, which ones you're hoping to do. You can include these in your budget as well. They want to see your eventual knowledge translation and impact plan. Once these come out, this is how we're going to let the patients know. This is how we're going to let the general population know. This is how we're going to present it to the scientific community. This is how we're going to publish. We're going to especially if you're doing grants that like directly have patient impact, like you're maybe doing something to show certain counseling around food and diet can help improve, gastric cancer outcomes, then maybe you're gonna, bring it to a society of registered dietitians and registered nutritionists, and you're gonna give them that knowledge so they can start including that in their counseling for their patients who have these kind of cancers. So they want to see some outcome. Of course, they're giving you so much money, and of course you are doing all the work, but they also want to have some of these milestones that'll help them measure these outcomes, right? Especially if you have a multi-year grant, which is meant to last for more than a year, it's always good to show, this is what we've done, this is what we've done. Some people work with novel methodologies, and in those cases, I've seen them in the first 6 months to 1 year, they publish the novel method that they're using. Once they've tweaked it, I've seen them publish just the pilot, the first 500 patients. We've done it, successfully done it. These were the issues. This is how we overcame it. It's a very novel study happening. They're in a pilot publication, and then when all the results are like unblinded, do like one big major publication. I've also seen like epidemiology grants and health system grants kind of done with different perspectives using the same rich data set, because with epidemiology and public, like public health and population health, you have such big data sources, especially when you're working with data from health administrative data sets, that you can reanalyze and reuse them to answer so many different questions and come up with so many different papers. Each PI might want to use the data for something a little bit different and come up with their own publication. So, you can really have a solid publication plan if you're planning accordingly early on, and you're writing those survey questions, you're writing those data collection plans from before. Okay, so your data collection, all of that would be in your materials and methods. That in itself, as you fill up each section, you're automatically in your mind, you're being prepared for the next section. That's the beauty of grant writing. I hope this video has been helpful for you guys. If it was, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Please let me know in the comments below what you thought, what other questions what other advice you would add if you were giving someone advice on grant writing. Once again, this was the Brown Feminist, and this is it for my crash course on research grant writing. Once again, there are many different kinds of grants. We only focused on academic research grants with government sponsors. Conflict of interest is something we didn't really touch on, but there's going to be a lot more videos coming up. But essentially, in one line, if you have a conflict of interest, if you're taking money from a certain company and doing research for them, it has to be declared. If you're taking having any personal gains from the outcomes of research, it should be there. I will be doing a full other crash course on ethics in research and conflict of interest in research. So stay tuned for that. And until next time, bye-bye. Hey guys, before you go, don't forget that I do offer one-on-one career counseling services in clinical research. So if you do feel that beyond the videos and the emails where I answer all of your questions, you need a little bit more of hands-on support, you're not getting those interviews and you're not really sure why, or you just don't know how to handle certain questions because of you don't have all the experiences, but you know that you can do the job. If you need some additional help in resume building, cover letter design, interview prep, or just general career consultations, I do offer this service now live. Find out more by clicking the link below. I have a whole video where I explain what services I offer, and there's a form there if you would like to sign up. Until next time, this was the Brown Feminist. Bye!